A lot of these guys are gay baiting. They're straight people, straight men who know there's a largely appreciative gay audience, and they're putting up their content in a way that appeals to us and being allowed to keep it up because they're ostensibly straight. Hi, this is Mike Balaban, and welcome to another episode of BAMMER Talks. Today I'd like to discuss the whole notion of censorship, particularly when it applies to male nudes, erotica, the kind of imagery that gay men tend to enjoy. It's going to be a little bit challenging to organize this conversation because it's complicated, and I'm not sure how much of it to highlight. But let's start. We live in an era where for several decades we've had pretty much unlimited access to imagery of whatever type we'd like. I mean, for example, right now you can go on Twitter and see just about anything sexual you want without any limitations. But we're also at a point in time where the forces of conservatism are rearing their heads and gaining momentum, and there is a question as to whether they will be able to roll back the kind of freedoms we've grown accustomed to, particularly when it comes to seeing images that homosexuals enjoy. One of the battlegrounds in which this is taking place is social media, and in particular Facebook and Instagram, which, because of their desire to grow their empire as large as possible and to have as many viewers as possible and not to run afoul of conservative forces that are more censorship oriented, and in particular not to displease the more cautious and conservative members of their audience, they put forward a set of community standards, so-called community standards, because there's no community really opining on them. And then they enforce those standards kind of unilaterally, arbitrarily, randomly, and in no seeming order. But what has emerged over time, at least anecdotally, and for those of us in the LGBT community who like to post our images on Instagram and Facebook, we experience what feels like an inordinate amount of censorship and constraint compared to others doing the same thing. So in my case, I have BAMMER.47, my Instagram page. It's public, open, and available to everyone. I want a democratic access to my content. I believe that it's important to educate those who are already gay and those that are contemplating whether they might be gay as to our history, both in text and in image form. So I leave it open, but what that leaves me vulnerable to is either an individual who might find my content objectionable. And it can be a super religious conservative person. It can be a troll who's just looking to cause problems, or somebody who's just deliberately anti-gay can file a complaint. And what it seems like happens, and we have no way of knowing for sure, is that Instagram and Facebook respond to one complaint and withdraw an image from their platform, because they don't have time to go and check and measure and compare and make a decision about the millions of photos that are posted and presumably the thousands that get complained on every day. So apparently, according to Facebook, at one point I had 53 marks against my name from photos that had been deleted. And whereas initially I used to get a notification that your photo violates our community standards, and it would be taken down, but at least I would know why. Over time, I began having my photos taken down without a notification being given to me. And whereas in the past they might happen several hours after I posted them, they began to occur within minutes. And then ultimately, I found in some instances, I would put up a photo, it would immediately appear for the world to see, and within a second, it would be taken down. So I believe I was being monitored by Instagram because I was troublesome. And, they were essentially blackballing me and may have been limiting how many people got to actually see my photos. So after a number of those, in February of 2022, suddenly my page disappeared. When I went to log on to it, it showed up, and then it froze, and then it disappeared. And I couldn't find it, and neither could anyone else. I didn't get any notice, but my account had been suspended. And I panicked because I had, at the time, 17 or 18,000 viewers, a lot of whom depended on me putting up the content, which I'm kind of a community service. I know that sounds self-congratulatory, but it's educational content. A lot of people rely on it, and I felt some responsibility to them, but I had no way of figuring out how to get that back. And I used every access available to me. I had people I knew who had relatives within the Facebook empire, and they came back and said that they had reached the monitors and they were not willing to review their decision. But suddenly, after about 2 weeks, when I kept checking and finally my page appeared to me, and I went to log in and it goes, "You violated our standards," more or less. "If you feel like this decision was wrong, click here." I did, and I applied for a review, and eventually, after 2.5 weeks, my page was restored. During that time, I had set up a backup page, or rather turned my website, BAMMER.co Instagram page, into my backup page, and I had grown that to about 9,000 followers, and I was using that as a way of reaching a lot of people that had previously seen me on BAMMER 47. But now I have both of those pages. Then again, in May, the same thing happened. The second time, about a week into it, the same ability to see my page suddenly recurred. That time, in the review process, I sent a note saying, "I've done everything I can to try to adhere to your supposed community standards, and I have no idea what it is that I'm doing that's causing my page to be suspended. I see many images by many other sources that are much more egregious than mine in terms of nudity or, potentially offensive content, and they remain up, and yet mine is being taken down. And I'm responsible to a large community of people who rely upon my content and who value it. And I would really appreciate it from an LGBT community standpoint if you would restore my page and allow me to continue doing what I'm doing." 15 minutes later, the page was restored. Who knows whether that's coincidence or what have you. But that's my own personal experience in dealing with the forces of censor at Instagram. And what I've begun to discern from all the people I talk to have had the same thing happen versus the content which I see posted on an ongoing basis that is much more prurient and much more obviously erotic than my own, that there seems to be either a bias in the management of Facebook and Instagram, or perhaps more likely that the algorithm, which is now doing an increasing amount of their censoring, has in fact been programmed with homophobic and misogynistic inputs. So I'll give you an example. We live in a society where the objectification of women and women's bodies is acceptable, or has long been more acceptable than the objectification of male bodies, because men are largely the ones in power and they like generally to look at women, and so they've allowed that to continue. But when it comes to the objectification of male bodies, there's a kind of a societal taboo about that. So by and large, there's a bias against this kind of content. As a test, I found an image, which I'm going to place here, of a nearly naked woman with essentially a tiny string thong covering her private parts from behind. Her butt is facing the mirror, and someone has labeled across the top of that, as if you are a healthy, libidinous male wanting to screw her. The question was labeled, "How long you lasting in this?" And it was clearly objectionable and offensive. And I submitted it to the Instagram platform with a complaint, asking them to review it and saying that I found it offensive and I'd appreciate them taking it down. A couple of days later, I got back a response: "This does not violate our community standards." So on the one hand, it's okay to show a woman nearly naked, essentially showing her genitals right into the camera, and there's no problem. Then you look and you see a lot of imagery that exposes the parts of the body that are supposedly not permissible according to the community standards of Facebook and Instagram. You're not supposed to show nudity. Well, that's a blanket description. They've written the standards in such a way that they can go to almost anything that is quasi-nude and remove it if they want. But if they were only consistent in what they did, there would be no problem. The issue is that there is an arbitrariness, a randomness, an inconsistency that is infuriating when your content is removed and others isn't. And when you look at the pattern, again, from my own personal anecdotal standpoint, it appears as if a lot of the male imagery, which is allowed to stand and stay in position, even though it's a lot more offensive than whatever I have put up, shows up on the pages of ostensibly straight Instagram influencers / fitness instructors who are making a living off the page and showing pretty much very close-ups of nude butts, some pubic hair, hugely obvious outlines of genitalia, perhaps even erect genitalia under their clothing. And yet when anything tending on those things appears in an image that I posted, it has been instantaneously deleted. So this is the problem. The forces arrayed against us in conservative America, which are going to use the battleground that's taking place right now as an attempt to roll back our rights, I believe. It's consistent with everything they're doing on the gay groomers bill, on the Don't Say Gay, on the anti-trans legislation. They're using us as a wedge issue with their very conservative, largely religious supporters who have no interest in seeing the kind of material that we do, allowing a lot of the kind of material we like to remain up as long as it's either about women or by guys who supposedly aren't gay. And a lot of these guys are gay baiting. They're straight people, straight men who know there's a largely appreciative gay audience, and they're putting up their content in a way that appeals to us and being allowed to keep it up because they're ostensibly straight. When openly gay people like myself with clearly gay sites with educational content are finding anything that we put that is remotely close to that being removed. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd like your thoughts on this. I have no solution to how we resolve this issue or protect our ability to see the kind of things we want to see online. I just know that there's a problem and it needs to be tackled, and I'm open to suggestions. Thank you very much for listening. This is Mike Balaban. It's been another episode of BAMMER Talks.